Hello, I'm the Dark Master. Welcome back to the Kirby Right Back at You Retrospective. In today's installment, we shall be covering episode 35, the Kirby Derby Part 1, or as it's known in the Japanese original, the glorious Poo 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 Land Grand Prix Part 1. This episode marks the first instance of what will become a regular occurrence in the anime, that being a story split across two separate episodes. Note that these are each their own episode and shall be treated to their own reviews. However, I shall also be talking about how this episode fares as a part of a larger story, but mostly how it stands on its own. You'll have to wait until I cover part two for an overview of my thoughts on the two-part special as a whole, however, in a more detailed manner. This episode was released in Japan as the 35th episode on June 8th, 2002, whereas in the English dub, instead, it was the 31st episode and was released on February 8th, 2003. Again, this was most likely due to the changes in the release date of other episodes, as opposed to anything involving the episode itself. Luckily, in both versions, the two episodes were released one after the other, so at least 4Kids is not entirely incompetent. Enough about those pre-release details. Let's start with the episode's plot. The episode opens to a shot of Gengu's toy store as they camera pans down to Tuff and Kirby looking into the window as we see a large go-kart in the store. They are amazed while Tuff wishes he could have one. Gengu, however, seems to be creepily watching them and asks if he wants to try it out. I guess Capitan doesn't have a driving license system. Tuff then begins driving extremely fast down the road. Enjoying himself, he drives deranged through the Cappy town. He eventually sees his sister and decides to nearly run her over, though all she gets is dizzy as he continues to drive like a maniac through town. He sees King Dedede and Escargoon leaving Kawasaki and complaining about the food. We also see an animation error where the kanji on the restaurant banners were not edited out for this specific scene. That's interesting, really. Tuff, with a mischievous grin, begins driving after them. The two malcontents flee for their miserable lives while they scream in agony. Tuff hits a rock and Kirby is sent flying into the sky due to his light weight, while the king and his snail servant jump into the river to escape Tuff's road rage. The king petulantly says Tuff is a brat. His mood is only worsened when Kirby falls to his head before running away from the grumpy king. The king then declares that he shall get that kid. After the intro, we see reused animation of the enemy delivery system as the king scowls at the delivery of the closest thing to a guest slash monster of the week, that being Dedede's limousine, referred to as the Royal Racer in the Japanese original. Now, Dedede's tank was likely retired to avoid military references following a certain little event called 9/11, which is honestly rather understandable, though it is telling that a Japanese company seems to have more respect for the victims than certain American political commentators. Plus, Dedede does seem to be the kind of guy who would own both a limousine and a tank. Plus, the limousine does have a nice aesthetic consistent with the King's. It has many tools and weapons that we shall see later on in the episode. The enemy sales guy hypes up the car while the king laughs about his upcoming plan. We then cut to Tuff, who greatly enjoyed the ride in the go kart. Tiff is less happy, angered by her brother's lack of care for road safety. Gengu laughs and says Kirby enjoyed himself. The conversation is interrupted by a news bulletin hosted by Waddle Doo, as we see Rick the hamster as a cameo plushie from Kirby's Dream Land 2 in the foreground. Waddle Doo announces King Dedede's grand race. Tiff and Tuff push Gengu aside to get a better look. Ouch. We cut to an aerial view of Cappytown, and then cut to Kawasaki's restaurant, where we see the Waddle Doo broadcast from the small television. Kawasaki wonders aloud what a pre is, but Gus, who is a mechanic, explains that it means that there's going to be a big prize. Waddle Doo explains the race, what it's about, where it will go, and its start date. Waddle Doo says all traffic will be closed while the race occurs. This pleases Chief Bookums, who is happy to not have to do speeding tickets for a time, while Professor Curio comments that racing is not a real sport. But Mayor Len Blustergas gets up and says it's the best sport ever, and to prove that, he intends to join the race. His wife is greatly concerned, with her husband saying he's got the guts, plus he's the only Cappytown resident to own a car. The mayor turns to Gus and asks if he can turn his old school car into one fit for a race, and he says he can. The group walk out, and Gus, inspecting the car, says it is doable. He just got to replace the engine of this rather old style motor vehicle. The conversation is cut off by the arrival of Tiff, Tuff, and Kirby, who are riding on that go kart from earlier. Tuff says he's going to join the race, while Tuggle expresses skepticism, but Tuff is confident, and Gengu ensures the others that is quite capable. He is cut off by the clanking of a horn as everyone turns to see the arriving King Dedede. His limousine glows in the sun, then compliments the mayor for joining his equal opportunity race. He looks at Kirby, who stares blankly. Tuff touches the small dedede hood ornament, while Escargoon, who had just polished it, begins chasing the little brat around the car, much to the king's annoyance. Tiff says Kirby will not risk his neck on the stupid race, while the two continue to chase each other in the background. Tuff stops and complains that Kirby must compete, as he is a navigator, with the mayor explaining that navigators are important, helping drivers to not get lost. Despite this, she says to get someone else, and the two walk away. Escargoon silently complains to the king that it seems like their malicious plan is unraveling, but the king declares that the baby will compete and he has a backup. We cut to the following night, where we see Tiff and Kirby walking past the large fountain in the castle's courtyard. Tiff explains to a confused Kirby that he can't enter the race, and offers him pancakes if he doesn't. Kirby is overjoyed and the two walk away. However, Kirby is distracted upon smelling something in the area, which is odd since he doesn't have a visible nose. He sees a plate of pancakes and runs over to eat it. Upon doing so, he sees another plate of pancakes. We cut to Tiff, greatly concerned, who is looking for Kirby. Sadly, then the horrible bird Corey enters into the episode, having been sent by Tuff to strike a deal with Tiff about Kirby joining Tuff by wearing a seatbelt. Tiff ignores this and asks him if he saw Kirby, who went missing, but the wretched bird is just as unaware as she is of Kirby's location. Takori looks around and sees something. Tiff goes over to it and recognizes it as an empty plate. We then see another, and then see another as they follow the path laid out. Takori really judges Kirby for his naivete. We cut to Kirby, who continues to eat and goes further into the hallway. Tiff and Takori eventually catch up with him while he was reaching up for another plate of pancakes. Tiff wonders how these pancakes got there and decides to take Kirby away, but Takori points to none other than Kirby's starship. The three are in awe as its surprising survival. We then see Tiff have a short flashback to the very first episode. Kirby comes to Caputown, where we see King Dedede shooting down Kirby's starship. Honestly, I like how this flashback is done better than other episodes because it's sort of in a grayscale, as you can easily tell that it's the past. I wish all the flashbacks were like this. Tiff is in shock to see it still in one piece, while Kirby's happy to see it again. Takori is confused as to why it's here, though Tiff suggests that maybe King Dedede moved it into here. Meta Knight then chimes in, saying that the ship is important as it was designed to care for young Star Warriors and help them to locate monsters in the galaxy. Tiff says if he fixes it, then Kirby might leave, while Meta Knight goes over to inspect it and says that if they can get the propulsion system working, the starship will work again. Then, to Tiff's shock, he says that Kirby must enter the Grand Prix as a test for Kirby's oh so bad piloting skills. Tiff is hesitant at first, but asks Kirby to be careful, and Kirby happily agrees. But Tiff is annoyed and says not to blame her if it ends up being a trap by King Dedede, which of course it is. And she protests it all. We see Dedede and Esragoon are spying on the group nefariously. We then cut to the next day to Mayor Len Blustergass's home. We see the old married couple complaining to each other. In the Japanese original, you can't hear this over the sound of the engine being worked on by Gus, while in the English dub, they can be heard. It's a nice change, to be honest, as it further emphasizes the strange relationship the two have at this particular instance. She says the mayor is being irresponsible and that he has more important personal issues. In either case, Hannah looks annoyed at Gus, who is just trying his best to do what the mayor asks him to. Hannah asks her husband if there is anything else about that day after tomorrow that's important. The mayor says it's the day of the race. Indignant, she asks if there's anything else, and he asks, isn't the race enough? Aghast by him, she wishes him a flat tire and stomps off in a huff. Gus asks what that was all about and why she's so mad. Mayor Len Blustergass says despite his 40-year marriage, he has no idea, sparking Gus to say what is perhaps the most red-pilled slash based thing in the entire show. Like, gosh darn. Women. We see Hannah looking down upon her husband before turning to a calendar. In the Japanese original, the calendar, in addition to having a photo of the young couple being married, also has the month June written on it, plus the days of the week as well. The English dub saw 4Kids remove all this text. Now, censorship is always bad, especially the days of the week. I mean, what called for that? Were the calendar people offended or something? Like, seriously, what's up with that? But as for the word June, it was seemingly removed to make it easier for the episode's syndication, as it wasn't always going to be aired in June. Honestly, pretty silly to be honest. I mean, it's not a big deal. There are plenty of shows that have taken place during different times than when they were originally aired. Enraged, Hannah tosses the calendar out the window, shattering glass, where it hits the mayor square in the back of the head, probably giving him a minor concussion. Gus wonders if he's okay and hands him his hat back, but the mayor tells him to keep on working on the car. We then cut to Gengu's toy store, where we see Gengu working on Tuff's go-kart. The pair talk, and Tough asks about his chances, and Gengu says, after some hesitation, that while the other cars might be more powerful, they are also heavy, which Tough interprets saying that he will be the lightest one and the winner. But then Gengu points out that he lacks a navigator due to Tiff preventing Kirby from participating with him. Tough asks if he can still be in the race without a navigator, but Gengu argues it's not a good idea, and the boy complains that his sister ruins everything. We cut to her as she proudly watches Meta Knight oversee Sword and Blade Knight repairing the ship. Meta Knight shows Kirby and Takori to a training area with a wheeled gray ship that looks sort of like a Meta Knight ship, but it's unconfirmed. Meta Knight explains to Kirby that this is a test to help him learn how to drive, as we see a sort of VR style display. In the Japanese original, Kirby repeats the word lever when Meta Knight points it out to him. In the English dub, he just says Poyo. Meta Knight explains the controls via the lever. Kirby then begins pushing the program. Takori tries to get him to pay attention, being a sort of co pilot in this case. In the Japanese original, Kirby says, race, race, in the English dub. This is replaced with him saying Poyo again, which is honestly a good decision. Everything seems to be going well at first, though after Takori's horrible insistence, he slams on the gas. Flames come out of the exhaust, nearly hitting Meta Knight, who jumps out of range just in time. Kirby is enjoying himself, but Takori tells him to slow down, and Kirby does so, though it causes the car to rocket backwards and again almost hit Meta Knight, who easily dodges this just in the nick of time. Inside the rubble, Kirby hops up and down, happy despite getting in a terrible accident, while the horrible Takori is simply bamboozled, saying obviously there is a reason Kirby doesn't have a license. We then cut back to the mayor's house at night. We see the mayor sleeping in his car, obviously tired from the previous day's antics. We see his wife Hannah come out and put a blanket on him due to the cold night. We then cut to Gengu and Tough, similarly sleeping in the car, with Tough dreaming about the race, winning it in his mind. We then cut to Meta Knight, standing solemnly as Sword and Blade Knight inform him that they have finished repairing the ship. As Meta Knight says, all they must worry about now is the driver, Kirby. We then cut to the next day with the day of the race. In the Japanese original, the letters dedede are visible on the arch. The English dub saw 4Kids airbrush this out for some odd reason. I don't know why. It's not like they misspelled the word. We see numerous cappies approaching the race area. We see Kawasaki selling concessions at the event. There is a then cut scene of Gengu selling miniature toys of all the vehicles that have entered the race. Honestly, a nice little scene, but it was cut from the 4Kids English dub due to spoilers showing Meta Knight's car. Yeah, he does enter the race, and frankly, it does make no sense for how Gengu would somehow have the time to make Meta Knight toys if it's a surprise. So I would have preferred personally if they had just kept the scene and airbrushed those specific toys out. Cutting it entirely just seems a little sad, to be honest. The Cappies get onto the benches. In the Japanese original, another short scene is there, which features a panning shot of the garages of the various racers. The English dub cut this for unknown reasons. We then see Mayor Len Blustergast being cheered on by his grandkids. Before he leaves, Hannah arrives and declares she shall be his navigator, pointing out how he always gets lost, and the mayor only mumbles bamboozled noises at her. We then cut to Kirby, who is sleeping in his race car. Spikehead says this is a spaceship, while Iroh says it won't matter since Kirby is asleep at the wheel. But then the twat bird known as Takori arrives and tastelessly wakes Kirby up. He explains to the baby that they're a team confusing slash scaring Kirby. We then cut to Tuff's crew, which are his parents. His mom tells him to go slow while his father points out that it is a race. Tuff is just annoyed at the pair's concerns and annoying sounds. However, much to his further annoyance, Tiff decides to join him. This causes great concern by her parents, but she explains her suspicions of Dedede's scheming and that she must participate for the sake of looking out for Kirby. We cut to a shot of the Cappies outside looking at the racetrack. We see Fala and Fololo serving as sports commentators. They talk first about the course, explaining how the race will go through town. In the Japanese original, there is some additional scenes that further explain the course, going through the forest, the shore side, and the rough terrain for 12 laps. The English dub removes this brief scene for some reason. Dedede, the sponsor of the race, is introduced and does a little speech, though not before a quick jab by Falala. In the Japanese original, he is not heard at all due to the crowd's loud antics. While in English dub, he can be heard, but is swiftly cut off by the crowd impatient for the race, and he says never mind. Falala and Fololo then introduce the riders and the cars. Team 1 is Escargoon and King Dedede in the Royal Wacer. Mayor Len Blustergas and his wife Hannah in the old school car is Team 2. Team 3 is Tiff and Tuff in the Gengu golf cart. In the Japanese original, there is this short scene of Gengu getting free promotion. Chef Kawasaki complains about this. It's a shame that 4Kids removed this, as it's a nice little character moment that just makes it seem more adorable. And Team 4 is Kirby and Takori in the Warp Star. It is a little funny how they use stock JPEGs for the little icons here. Folo and Fala tell the racers to move to the starting line. Then a Waddle Dee delivers a letter to the commentary duo as we see that there is a last-minute entry and cut to see Meta Knight in his vehicle, whose arrival greatly annoys King Dedede. An interesting pair of little details is that the M on Meta Knight's car resembles Mario logo from Mario Kart. Also in the English dub, it's referred to as the Metamobile, a clear reference to the DC superhero Batman's vehicle, the Batmobile. Dedede complains about this last-minute entry, with Escargoon calling him a troublemaker and further saying that he can't trust him, as he may try to help Kirby. But Dedede arrogantly says he's no match for them due to his limousine. Tiff asks Meta Knight, why is he here? To which the knight answers, it's to test his skills. Tiff is shocked, but Tuff says not to worry, as they will beat him. Waddle-Doo raises the starting flag, while Takori asks if Kirby is ready, only for him to be asleep. He wakes him up and gives another brash pep talk that leaves Kirby angrily determined to win. We see the 5 race teams prepare on the line. This episode is one of the few times you see the mayor, his wife, Tiff, and Tuff in CGI. Sadly, it really hasn't aged as well as the stuff used on Kirby and King Dedede. We can honestly tell where all the budget went. In what is the last scene change between versions, we hear the Revenge of Meta Knight theme in the background. It really works to sort of pump up the viewer thanks to its militaristic buttons. We get a close-up of the racers, as well as those who are supporting them and those that are watching them intently. And on the mark, the cars all go, except Kirby, who is confused by the controls despite having used them before, much to Decoy's indignant annoyance. We then see the racers head through Cappytown to everyone's danger. Dedede is in the lead, while the mayor's wife complains that he took a turn rather fast, while Tiff is concerned about Kirby, while her brother assures her that he's just behind them. Takori freaks out, trying to get Kirby to start the car. Eventually, it actually starts, though no help to him. Despite Folo saying that they will have a hard time catching up, they actually have a relatively easy time, very quickly reaching and overtaking Mayor Len Blustergas, much to his annoyance. Kirby then begins to catch up with Meta Knight, but unfortunately takes a wrong turn and gets lost in the forest. Though in the end, it all works out as Kirby drives off a sheer cliff and is sent flying back in front of Tuff. Takori asks who is in the lead, and Tuff answers he's not certain, as it's either King Dedede or Meta Knight. Kirby then speeds off, much to Tuff's annoyance as Takori berates him. And then we cut from what looks like Green Hill Zone to what looks like Tatooine esque canyons. Seriously, this somehow looks better than anything in the prequel trilogy, except the Darth Maul fight. The king, seeing Kirby behind them, sees them close in. With an evil grin, he pulls a lever and activates a missile, launching turret that shoots the canyon walls, which begin to collapse as Takori screams in agony. As the screen divides into 6 parts as the episode closes on a cliffhanger. In the English dub, some no-name 4-kid secretary voice actor does a sort of little narration. Interestingly, this would become a recurring trend in the series, though that's not entirely a good thing as the narrator persuades the audience to watch part 2 at 11 o'clock. You see, this two-parter was released during a time when 2 episodes were released a week. One was at 11, and this was maintained even when the show switched to a single episode per week. So then, in those instances, the narrator would tell them to watch at a time when there really wasn't nothing to watch. Honestly, it seems like they didn't see the change coming and just pre-did this with the beliefs that the schedule would be consistent. Now let's go over the positive, negatives, and my final thoughts. In terms of positives, I must commend the amount of care that they put into the plot of this episode. I mean, in a lesser show, DDD would have just gotten the limousine with no explanation at all, but they actually put in the effort to actually justify a realistic reason for this change. I mean, DDD does seem like the kind of guy who would get a brand new car just to teach a annoying kid a lesson. Plus, these racing episodes are always nice to see. It really gives off a sort of wacky racer vibe, and it's no wonder that we would see this thing occur again in the future. Another positive is how the episode depicts the relationship between the mayor and his wife. I mean, it's honestly rather charming how they sort of interact with each other. It's not full on abusive, though it does highlight the sort of struggles that every relationship goes through. You'll see this resolved in the second part, but it does work out in the end. Arguably, really the only negative with the episode is just some of the censorship seems outright silly. And since it's part one of a 2-part story, it does end on a cliffhanger. And I know some people hate cliffhangers. I don't, but some do. And if you don't like cliffhangers, you're going to want to watch part 2 and part 1 just at the same time. Also, it doesn't have an ability, but I don't think that this episode really needed a copy ability. In fact, if they put it in, it seemed kind of forced. Speaking of, I would say that this episode serves well enough on its own as its own episode, but it also works well as a part one, and its ending directly goes into the next one, and it just gets you hooked for the part two. In fact, I would say that if you're going to watch this episode at all, you definitely should watch part two immediately afterwards, as it'll make it more enjoyable. Overall, this is a great episode that is well worth a watch, especially if you watch part 2 immediately afterwards. I'm the Dark Master, and join me next time on the Kirby Right Back at Ya Retrospective. And have a wonderful day. And subscribe if you want to see more content like this. Trust me, part 2 will be out as soon as possible.